Hello everyone and welcome to today's video. Today we're talking about the 2026 Senate elections, obviously for the US Senate, and I'm looking at today's video with the idea of what is the Democrats' best realistic scenario that they can get in 2026. Now I am going to be doing another video as well in the coming days on the Republicans' best case scenario, so make sure to check that one out as well. But today's video is going to focus on what the Democrats' best case scenario is. So right now, the current Senate map that I have for 2026 currently has the Republicans favored to win about 51 Senate seats. Democrats currently favored to win 45, with 4 Senate seats I'm currently considering as toss-up or as battlegrounds. These are the Senate seats in Georgia, North Carolina, Michigan, and Maine. So for today's video, I'm going to go through the 4 battleground seats that I think Democrats could potentially be in play of winning. And then I'm also, after I do those, going to talk about the other seats that are in the lean and likely category and talk about how Democrats could try and expand the Senate map a little bit in 2026. First, I'm going to start with the state of Maine, because Maine could perhaps be the most interesting Senate race in 2026. Maine, this seat is currently held by Republican incumbent Susan Collins. Now, Susan Collins is the only Republican senator representing a state that former Vice President Kamala Harris won in the 2024 presidential election. So obviously, this is making her a top target of the national and Maine Democrats in this race. It also should be worth noting, Collins has not officially declared that she's running again, but she has expressed interest in doing so. What's interesting right now is the Democrats, they have a lot of Democratic candidates running, but all eyes are on the governor of Maine, Janet Mills, who many are viewing as the strongest possible candidate to challenge Susan Collins in this Maine Senate race for 2026. She's kind of the candidate that everyone's waiting on for the decision to be made. Now, her Senate race, when she was last up in 2020, she won by 8.6%. But it should be worth noting, though, also, when you go through the actual numbers, on the first round of voting, Susan Collins got 50.98% of the vote. The Democrat, Sarah Gideon, got 42.39% of the vote. And if you're a casual observer of elections and such, you may be wondering, well, that number seems a little bit odd. And what's interesting about Maine is Maine utilizes a system of elections called ranked choice voting, which is the winning candidate must break 50% of the vote on the first round, the initial vote, or it will go to the ranked choice voting process, and then the one candidate will have to break 50%. Now, in this situation, Susan Collins broke 50% on the first round, but she did only get 50.98% of the vote, where the Democrat, Sarah Gideon, got 42.39%. An independent candidate, Lisa Savage, got 4.95%. Another independent, Max Lynn, got 1.65%. So that's roughly over 6 points or so that was also independent vote. If it did go to ranked choice voting, Susan Collins obviously would have enough support to win, so it would not need to be happening. But I would bet a lot of that third-party vote likely would have gone to Sarah Gideon, making that 8-point margin of victory that Susan Collins got probably a lot smaller heading into the election. So that's important to watch for 2026 as we're talking about this Senate race. Now, obviously, a big determining factor for 2026 is going to be the election environment that Democrats and Republicans are running in for 2026. For now, we don't really know how it's going to be, but we do know the Democrats are likely to have an advantage, and that could be anywhere from 2 to 5 points or so, maybe even more depending on the type of night Democrats have. But Democrats should be favored in this election environment. Now, back in 2024, Kamala Harris won the state of Maine against Donald Trump by 6.9%, though the Republican 2nd District voted for Trump by 9 points. As for the Senate race, this is going to be very close, but I do think if it's Susan Collins versus Janet Mills, especially in the Democrats' best case scenario, Maine certainly, seeing as it is already a Democratic state at the presidential level, certainly could narrowly go for the Democrats, flipping one Republican Senate seat towards the Democratic direction. So Maine will be a very important one to watch for 2026. The next Senate seat that's the most obvious pickup for 2024 is the state of North Carolina. North Carolina, this seat is currently held by the Republican Senator Thom Tillis. He is retiring, not seeking another term, and the Democrats have landed an absolute all-star recruit in the former governor of the state of North Carolina, Roy Cooper. This is literally perhaps the Democrats' best candidate recruit for all of 2026, and Roy Cooper. He presents the Democrats a rare opportunity in the usual Republican-leaning swing state of North Carolina at being able to potentially win this race. Now, the Republicans are running former chair of the Republican National Committee, Michael Whatley, who already has the endorsement of President Trump, and Laura Trump as well, and Senators John Thune and Tim Scott. So Whatley's already consolidated support as well. So the Democratic and Republican primaries here are essentially set, and now it's on to the general. Where thus far, there hasn't been a ton of polls, but the polls that have been taken thus far show Roy Cooper starting out with a bit of an early lead in this race. Still a lot of undecided vote left. Roy Cooper is more well known in the state of North Carolina than Michael Whatley is, so this is going to be a very close race that's going to go down to the wire. But in the Democrats' best case scenario here, it certainly would not be unrealistic at all to see North Carolina ending up in the lean Democratic category for Roy Cooper. This puts the Democrats up to 47 Senate seats. This would be the Democrats flipping 2 Republican seats from 2024 to 2026 in this map. Now we have 2 other toss-up seats that are currently held by Democrats. First, we're going to go to the state of Georgia. Georgia, this Senate seat is held by the Democratic incumbent U.S. Senator Jon Ossoff. Now, Ossoff won a very close election back in 2020. And in this one, this was part of that election year where Joe Biden narrowly won the presidency. Both Georgia's Senate races did not go over 50% on the initial ballot, so they had to go to a runoff. So on election day, David Perdue was leading over Jon Ossoff 49.73 to 47.95. Perdue was only about a few thousand votes away from actually breaking that 50% threshold and defeating Ossoff. But that did not happen, so they went to a runoff election. This is a 2-round system where the top 2 candidates advance and one candidate breaks 50%. And in that, Ossoff and the Democrats were more motivated to get out and vote. Ossoff ended up winning 50.6% to Perdue 49.39%. President Trump, however, did nearly win back Georgia in 2024. So this is going to be a seat Republicans are targeting to try and win back. However, one good news for Democrats and for Jon Ossoff is the Republicans' top-tier best recruit, and Brian Kemp, the governor of Georgia, officially announced he would not be running for Senate. He has now endorsed Republican Derek Dooley in this race. So the Republicans are without their top contender. Now, U.S. Representative Buddy Carter, Mike Collins, and the aforementioned Derek Dooley are all running. We're going to have to wait and see how this Republican primary plays out. And thus far, Derek Dooley has been endorsed by Kemp. President Trump has not weighed in on an endorsement in this race as of yet. The early polling shows a tight race thus far with a lot of undecided vote, though Mike Collins does seem to be the early leader at this current point in time. The early polling as well, it's been a very narrow lead for Jon Ossoff in most cases, but it's been a very consistent one, even in Republican polls, that Jon Ossoff starts out with an early lead in this race, though it does seem that Mike Collins is giving Ossoff the hardest fight of the Republicans running. I actually think, then compared to some other predictors, that I think Georgia's Senate race is going to be closer than many are having it, but I do think Jon Ossoff is still going to ultimately end up winning this Senate race in Georgia, holding on and surviving another 6 years. And again, this is the Democrats' best case scenario, so Georgia would obviously go blue in that scenario, but I do think Ossoff right now is favored to win pretty much regardless. Now we can go to the state of Michigan, where Michigan, this is a wide open race. This is going to be Democratic incumbent Senator Gary Peters. He is retiring. He's not seeking another term, or he's not seeking a third term. And what's interesting about this one is this is kind of the flip of some other races. In this one, the Republican primary is already pretty much set, where the Republican Mike Rogers, the nominee for Senate in 2024, is the only major Republican running, and he already has the endorsement of President Trump and 3 of the top U.S. senators in the United States. Now, for the Republicans. Now, on the Democratic side, it's a wide open primary. U.S. Representative Haley Stevens, State Senator Malik McMorrow, and Abdul Al-Sayed, the former Wayne County Health Director, are the 3 leading Democrats at this current point in time in the race. So it is a really tough fight going on in this Democratic primary, where the early polling thus far shows Haley Stevens leading only by about 2 points in the National Republican Senatorial Committee poll. Whereas in the Global Strategy Group poll, which is a Democratic poll sponsored by Mallory McMorrow, Stevens is up by about 4 points, with a lot of undecided vote left. So this Democratic primary is going to be very competitive, and we'll have to wait and see how that all ends up going. For the general, it's going to be a very close race. Stevens versus Rogers shows Stevens leading by about 2 points or so in the most recent polls, though it is very close. Whereas Abdul Al-Sayed versus Rogers, Rogers is actually leading very narrowly in that matchup. And McMorrow versus Rogers, it's a bit of a split between the 2 polls. Some have Rogers leading, some have McMorrow leading. So this is going to be a very close race. Republicans certainly could win it, but in the Democrats' best case scenario, I think we see Michigan narrowly go for the Democrats. So in the Democrats' best case scenario, I think we could see Democrats hold on to their 2 seats in Georgia and Michigan, and then pick up the Republican-held seats in North Carolina and Maine. I think this is kind of the ceiling for what the Democrats could do. Now, in the Democrats' best case scenario, where basically it's a wave election and everything kind of goes their way, there are a few other seats that Democrats are going to want to be targeting. The first among them is going to be the state of Ohio. Now, Ohio, this is currently held by Republican incumbent Senator Jon Husted, who he is appointed to fill the remainder of the term of Vice President J.D. Vance, who previously held this seat. And Husted will be the Republican candidate again in this general election. Now, the Democrats, for their part, have landed former U.S. Senator Sherrod Brown to run for this race again. So they have landed an absolute A-plus tier recruit for this race. So much so that when this race started out in the likely Republican category, now this race is down to lean or even tilt Republican in most of the rankings. Now, the early polling actually shows Jon Husted leading by more than 5 points in both the Bowling Green State poll from February and the Emerson College poll from August. So it does show that Husted is starting out with a stronger lead against Brown than the other Republican Bernie Moreno, who faced off against Brown in 2024, previously had. So that is good news for Husted and the Republicans. But Sherrod Brown also, in that Senate race against Moreno, just lost by 3.6%, under 5 points, a very close matchup. And back in 2018, Ohio did go for Sherrod Brown by 6.8%. In the Democrats' absolute best case scenario, it's not impossible to see Ohio falling into the tilt Democratic category for Sherrod Brown. But Ohio has moved a lot to the Republican direction, and given how the state has voted for Donald Trump 3 times in a row by more than 5 points every single time, I think even in the Democrats' best case scenario, we're probably going to see Ohio under the 5% mark, maybe in between 1 and 5, but I think Ohio remains on the Republican side. But Democrats, if everything broke their way, it is technically mathematically possible for Sherrod Brown to pull out a win there, especially if everything breaks for the Democrats. That, I think, is the Democrats' best pickup opportunity. Democrats have now, in their best case scenario, would also like to try and win Iowa, but now that Joni Ernst is not running, I think the Democrats' chances there, at the Senate level at least, are going to be a lot tougher. Nebraska with Dan Osborne, the independent, that is another state Democrats are targeting, but now that the Republican Deb Fischer, who only won by about 7 points in 2024, Republicans know who Dan Osborne is. They know it's going to be a very tough fight and are going to probably take him a lot more seriously as a candidate. So I think Republicans will be a little bit more prepared for that fight. I still think it's going to be competitive, but I think Republicans are going to be relatively in good shape there. The two likely Republican seats that I'm actually watching for the Democrats to try and make a play at are Alaska and Texas. First, I'm going to start with Alaska because this is a very interesting special case here. The Republican incumbent Dan Sullivan is eligible to run for re-election, and I have not heard anything thus far suggesting that he could be vulnerable or that he has poor approval ratings. The biggest reason that this race could be competitive is that former U.S. Representative Mary Peltola is reportedly considering running for this Senate race. Now, Peltola is one of the rare Democrats in Alaska that has won nationwide office most recently. Most recently, she won the U.S. House seat for Alaska in 2022 by 9.9% against Sarah Palin. Where back in 2020, it was held by the Republican Young, and then in 2024, Nick Begich, the Republican, narrowly defeated Mary Peltola by about 2 points in that race. So it ended up being a very, very close one in the runoff election, where Begich won 51.3 to 48.7 when everything was said and done. So Peltola, for a Democrat in Alaska, is one of the best candidates out there that the Democrats could run. Now, Sullivan did win his race by 12.7% back in 2020, and if Peltola were to enter, I expect this race will be a lot closer. The early hypothetical polling for this race, one poll from Alaska Survey Research, the most recent poll from the end of July and beginning of August, showed Sullivan leading over Peltola by about 5 points, with 11% still undecided. She gets up to about 42% of the vote. Data for Progress, which is a Democratic sponsored polling firm, voted or has Dan Sullivan leading over Peltola 46 to 45%, with 4% undecided. Where Alaska Survey Research back in 2023 had Peltola up 44 to 41, still though a lot of undecided vote. The biggest problem for this race here is for Peltola to win, she's going to have to get a very high percentage of the vote. In the Senate race in 2022, in 2020, the Democrat got 41.19%. So Peltola in the early polling thus far already starts out better than what that Senate race ended up being. The question is, can Peltola win enough of those undecided voters in Alaska to get enough support to win this race? That's where the question is going to be. I think the Democrats' best case scenario, I think we see Alaska potentially fall under 5% and be a lean Republican win. I do think the Republican holds on there, but I certainly think Alaska could be a lot more competitive, which could have an effect. Even if Mary Peltola does not win the Senate race in the state, if Republicans have to spend money and resources in Alaska to hold on, that could hurt Republicans in other Senate seats, like in Georgia, Michigan, North Carolina, Maine, that Republicans need those resources and money to win. That could hurt them down ballot in those races if they have to defend Alaska. The last Senate seat I'm watching as a potential Democratic target is the state of Texas. Now, Texas obviously is a very Republican state based on the 2024 presidential results. It just voted for Donald Trump by 13.7%. But the Senate race in 2018 for Ted Cruz's Beto O'Rourke was only a 2.6% win for Cruz. So in the right election environment with an unpopular enough Republican candidate, Texas can have a close Senate race. And this is what the scenario basically relies on. For the Republican Senate seat, which is held by incumbent John Cornyn, to be competitive in Texas, it would need to be Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton. He would need to win this Republican primary in advance to the general. That would be step one for the Democrats in making this a competitive race. Now, the good news for the Democrats is Paxton and Cornyn in the recent few weeks or so have been essentially neck and neck in this Republican primary, with still a lot of undecided vote left out there. But for a while, Ken Paxton has been leading by a pretty large number. Now, on the Democratic side, the Democrats do have Colin Allred, their nominee from 2024, running again, and State Representative James Talarico is expected to be announcing his bid any day now, even possibly, as of the time of recording this, September 9th, so even possibly tomorrow. So that could be a very big get for the Democrats in that race as well. Now the question is going to be, can the Democrats win with John Cornyn or Ken Paxton in the race? With John Cornyn running, the answer seems to essentially be no. Cornyn starts out with a much higher floor of support, and the Democrats don't really be able to keep up as much. In a new poll, which is sponsored by Colin Allred's campaign, so certainly take that with a grain of salt, Allred versus Paxton shows the very least. Allred starts out with a narrow lead and could potentially win. For Emerson College poll, which I'd put a lot more stock in than the Democratic internal poll, it's about a 5-point lead for Paxton over Allred, with 13% undecided. So in that one, I think Paxton would still win, but there's a lot more undecided vote and a chance for the Democrats to win that race than a lot of Republicans in Texas would certainly like. So for that one, that would have Texas falling into the lean Republican category. But I still think the Democrats' best case scenario, they get 49 Senate seats. Republicans are at 51. I have a very hard time envisioning the Democrats winning the Senate majority in 2026. But I think if they have everything go their way for 2026, they can get up to 49 Senate seats, and that could put them in a very good position to maybe win back the Senate in 2028, especially if they were to win back the White House. I hope you enjoyed this video. Make sure to like and subscribe if you did. Leave a comment below, tell me your thoughts, and I hope to see you in a future video.